going to throw two more movies out there. I initially wanted to do a few more on this, particularly Them That Follow, because the original plan was The Farewell ended up at the Art House Theater just out of town here, and Them That Follow was also there, and my plan was to go see both of those until, shock surprise, The Farewell actually came here to the Regal in town for like a week and a half. So I ended up not going out of town, so we also ended up getting the now getting closer to infamous John Travolta movie that was put on streaming. So I went ahead and decided to throw that on there despite the fact that we're dealing with two totally and completely different movies. Alright. we'll go with it. Something that's probably going to do really well at the Oscars and something that's probably going to do really well at the Razzies. Why not put them together? Let's go ahead and start with The Farewell, the Oscar contender, if you weren't sure. Which is one of the things about this movie that really stands out immediately when you just look at the synopsis itself and the concept of it is there are kind of so many different openings you can have in regards to tone, what direction this is going to go. And I think what the writer-director Lula Wang does so well is that she kind of just goes in all of them, but manages to somehow find a balance. And it's also on top of the fact that this is apparently a story that's very true to her own life, like it's a story taken directly from her life. With I believe the Aquafina character pretty much in place of her. So when you hear the concept, which if you're unaware is that her grandmother is diagnosed with like stage 4 cancer, which means that she's probably not going to make it much longer, and so it's like, I think it's a sort of, her dad explains it, it's like a Chinese custom to take the burden off of the shoulders of the sick family member and put it on the rest of the family. So the whole idea is to not let her know that she has stage 4 cancer while the rest of the family does. And they basically stage a sort of farewell party under the guise of a wedding of one of the cousins. That just sort of, they play off as they're young, so it was a last minute wedding, what can you do? And then everything goes from there. And it's like, this does have, with that kind of setup, the makings of like a really sort of tragic family drama sort of thing. But it also kind of lends itself to like a sort of, I don't know if it'd quite be screwball comedy, but a sort of classic type of comedy. Like it's a plot like this I could almost see in like a Woody Allen movie back in the day. Which is, and if you're not a Woody Allen fan, don't let that deter you. That's strictly in sort of the concept. It kind of reminds me of something he would have done. It has in no way really the feel of a Woody Allen movie much at all. Except maybe a few of those Bergman-esque lingering camera shots. But other than that, and family drama. But apart from that. And the thing about that also is how well it's handled is the fact that you're never really, whenever it goes to like the next moment, you're never really sure if it's going to be like moving or dramatic or funny. You just kind of have to watch it play out, and that sort of keeps you constantly guessing what direction the movie's going to go, but either direction it does go, as messy as that sounds, for the most part it works really well. And going on the comedy portion of it, I like that they even seem to have a bit of fun with the subtitles. Where there was a couple of funny moments involving those, where it was like there's a moment where I think Aquafina's on the phone, and she's hanging up, and she says, "K, thanks, bye." And the subtitle actually, is she's speaking, but the subtitle actually has it as just the letter K when she says K. Or the moment when there's a very humorous moment in the middle of a movie, where they're visiting the grave of a past relative, and they all kind of have to keep bowing over and over again, and they're saying the same thing as they do it, and like you can see them getting worn out doing it over and over again, and even they're saying the same thing over and over again, and it continues to be subtitled. Then after a while, they just stop subtitling because they're like, they get the point. It's gone on so long. So that's just a little way. Like the scene is already funny in itself, but to like add the humor in it by way of the subtitles, I think is an even nicer touch. to sort of elaborate just a little further on what works about the scene as it is. In the way, because Wang's direction here obviously is like, she seems to be having a nice mesh here between the subtle, but there's also a sort of like liveliness to it you may not be expecting in a movie like this. Um, but as far as the shots that are more like, I guess, lingering and not as flashy would be like the way the family members communicate. How a lot of it is dialogue and back and forth, and we see all the different like colorful characters and personalities. But then there's also a lot of use of like body language and like the way they're placed in the frame. Like Aquafina's probably big scene, at least to me. You sort of expect in a movie like this, it might be, and the fact that she's actually built up, like it becomes an issue that she's an emotional person. Like they have to try to keep her away from this whole thing because they're like, if you see her, your grandmother, and start crying immediately, you're gonna blow our cover. So they try to keep her away at first. So you would think with a setup like this, with that character in this story, that her big scene would be like a big emotional scene where she's like, playing around and goes like plays to the back of the room and all that. But it's just kind of a, a calm scene where she's sitting on the floor, which is like constraining in this weird way when you've got to do like this sort of big emotional moment. That's kind of your big scene in the movie. So I thought that was really interesting. Like I said, kind of shows the different ways that you can just sort of use the placement in the framing rather than necessarily just having them say and do big things. And you can do like half the work for them before they even have to get started. But not to take away from what she does either. Because obviously I was a bit... I have thrown criticism at Aquafina in the past with stuff like Ocean's 8 and that dreadful Netflix movie and Crazy Rich Asians. And it's like, she's... Oh yeah, so she's basically that type, and she's like overexposed, she's getting shoved down our throats, and then it's like, suddenly she's got this movie at Sundance, and everybody's raving that she's like a Best Actress nominee contender, and it's like this really genuine dramatic performance, and it's like, usually, those kind of performances don't come as quickly, to actresses that have played the parts that she has up to this point, the side comedy character that's over the top and obnoxious and all that. But apparently, I think I read somewhere she had actually been cast in this before those movies even like happened. So it's like there's kind of always been a balance here to her. We've just kind of only seen one side of it up to this point, but this is more like this is hardly like a turning point in her career. It's just like, oh no, she also has this on top of that, and it's like we've been kind of denied the really good stuff that she can do up to this point. I know a lot of people liked her in those other movies, and that's how she's gotten to the status that she's at, but I'm not a fan. And a lot of it also comes from the heart of the movie is her relationship with her grandmother, of course. And the grandmother character and the actress do like really stand out, where there is the concept lends itself to that really interesting contrast where it's like, she's the one that's dying, and all the family members are healthy or as healthy as they're going to be. And she's obviously, because she's the only one that doesn't know, she's the one that's not down. In contrast to them, she's going to be like really full of life. And be the one that's like making comments on like everything around her, and and just on top of being a comedic performance in that sense, there's also definitely something very lived in and very naturally grandmotherly about that vibe, to the point that it's like she, as an actress, it's like she doesn't even need to try. Like it's just kind of in there within it feels like it's already in there within the story once we've started, and that's really great, and really adds like the authenticity to the characters, and particularly the interactions between the two of them, because that's where the big meaning of the movie really falls in. And just the idea of, because you hear about movies like this and you probably think of some sort of Oscar bait thing where it's like Meryl Streep in like One True Thing or something, where it's like the actress is really, baiting for awards, playing the dying character and getting weaker and weaker as they go, having big emotional scenes and stuff like that. And yet this, despite its plot, this is a movie that's focused mostly through the perspective of the grieving as opposed to the potentially or inevitably grieved. So it really captures that thing where it's like if you've had a family member that like has cancer, or as you've had to like watch go through that, you know, process of shutting down. It's that portion is much worse than after the fact. Like after the fact, I imagine for most people, this is usually the way it is with me. But it's like, it's once the after the fact comes, there's kind of a bit of a relief that like the suffering's over for both the family and the sick person. And for this to be kind of focused on the family themselves and how they're dealing with it, and that idea of it's the build up of it that's worse, and like the longer the movie goes on, the more the family's kind of it's getting harder to hold their roofs together as they kind of start to crumble, but they still do their best to keep the whole thing going. So I like that it really focused on that, and like I said. Is able to also do that and like go into this whole thing of like there's, you know, inevitable mix-ups, and there's like just the whole idea of keeping something when somebody sets it up for that whole comedy thing, but it's like it can do the comedy thing and go towards those setups and pursue them, but without like losing the authenticity of that whole feeling of losing somebody, or the process of like anticipating that and doing the whole saying goodbye thing. And it kind of especially adds a bit of a dramatic spark to it with the whole one of them doesn't know what's going on thing. So yeah, if there's one thing that I think was kind of bothering me, and I couldn't I was watching it and I could sense something where I was like, I feel like it's missing something. Like I feel like there's something that's not quite yeah, just something that's not quite there, I guess. And I guess it's because I think there could have been. We're talking about the balance and tones, which is great. But in one case where I think there was a bit of a lack of balance was it going back and forth between being like more contemplative and quiet about itself, and the characters interacting. Because there's a lot of the whole contemplative type scenes where it's just kind of people gazing off, and it's like we can see the subtlety in their performances, and you know, the fear of loss and all that stuff going on. But it's like that's established pretty early and kind of beaten into the ground a little bit because we get it so early. In cases where like that, where we'd usually encourage more subtle and quiet scenes like that. But when you introduce this cast of characters with these performances and the interactions that we see, I feel like in the quieter moments, while we can appreciate that to an extent, it also feels like we're kind of being cheated a little bit by not getting more of the family being the family. And so I feel like we could, and I think the runtime doesn't help that either. I think it's only like an hour 40. So splitting that up between those two, it kind of felt like we got shorted a bit on one, and one that I think we would have liked to have seen more of, but still, it's nice that all these pieces are still here anyway. So yeah, I think that's all I really need to say about this one. It didn't have like, even having just gone through a similar situation a mere couple of years ago, I had I wasn't as like affected emotionally by it as I kind of expected to be, but and maybe it was just because there was that little. It kind of itched in the back of my brain that it felt like there was just a little something missing throughout that wasn't quite taking it over to that level into greatness. And I'm gonna say it would probably be. I'd have to see it again, obviously, and I'm sure I will, being an awards contender. But yeah, that's what I'm feeling like it might be now. Is I could have just used more character interactions and stuff like that. It's more scenes like the scene with her and her mom when her dad's passed out on the bed. Scenes like that would have really brought more, you know, power to a lot of these scenes. So yeah, and if you're a fan of Harry Nilsson's song "Without You," I strongly recommend staying for the credits too. So there's that. Alright, let's move on to The Fanatic. The John Travolta stalker movie directed by Fred Durst of Limp Bizkit fame. So I don't. Okay, but just before anything here, and I really don't want to rain on anybody's parade, and I don't want to seem like I'm, you know, not trying to have fun and all this or take away other people's fun or whatever, but going into this movie, I had heard about some reviews coming out, and I didn't, because I like to do my own thing before I look into anything. I didn't read or look at any reviews going into this. I just heard that people were really, really playing it up, that it was this, The Room-esque bad movie. And this is the second year in a row Travolta's dealt with this after Gotti last year. And not only was it just because I don't like to look at reviews before I do my own, but I also didn't look at them because I feel like they're all just going to say the same thing. Which is this whole thing where, like, there can't just be a bad movie anymore. There can't just be a bad movie that comes out and is bad and then goes away and dies. Like, everybody becomes obsessed with the idea of making a bad movie into, like, a meme. And I feel like that's what's happening with this movie, especially after having watched it. And it's like, I can just imagine the stuff in this movie that's going to get blown out of proportion. I thought the Gotti thing was blown out of proportion, too. That movie is so unremarkably mediocre. I don't know how it ever blew up into the... Apart from the marketing, I don't know how it ever blew up into that whole... whatever it was, being, like, the worst movie ever thing. Yeah, going this... And people were, like, really building up the... Yeah, Fred Durst directed this. Like, the Fred Durst, like the Limp Bizkit guy. And it's like, yeah, I know, he's been directing movies for 10 years. You just fucking open your eyes. He did two. He did, like, 2 movies that came out around the same time. And they were 2 totally different movies. The Long Shots, the kids' football movie with Ice Cube, and The Education of Charlie Banks with Jesse Eisenberg, which I talked about on this channel, like, a year ago. And so, yeah, and then I heard about this movie forever. I saw that first still of Travolta in his fucking shirt and his weird-ass hair. And it's like, oh, he's going for it, okay. And people are building up the Travolta's, like, really in this whole, straight-to-DVD land. He's trying to see just how bad he can go and all that. But much like Nicolas Cage, who he's often compared to when he does movies like this, is that they are always the ones that are called out. They're like, oh my god, this is, like, their worst, best performance ever, whatever the fuck people say. But it's like, it's never them. It's never them. It is always how fucking shoddily made it is, and how poor the writing is, and how the people that made it seem to have no idea what the fuck they were doing, and hired editors that are on fucking meth. And that's always the problem. But of course, being the face of the movie, it always lands on, oh, this actor is like one of the worst things ever now. Despite their fucking amazing legacy, but still... and yeah, I don't think Travolta's bad in this. I just think it's the character and the writing, and nobody knew what the hell they were doing behind the scenes. And I also think that we talk about the whole Fred Durst Limp Bizkit thing, and yeah, there even is a scene where Devon Sawa puts on Limp Bizkit for his son. He's like, "Hey, you ever heard of Limp Bizkit? This is the greatest shit ever." And it's like, yeah, okay, but. Limp Bizkit aside, yeah, I just said Devon Sawa. And if you know the plot of this movie, I would think it's more the Eminem fans that are giving this the side eye rather than people who know Limp Bizkit or are aware of Fred Durst. And it's like, at that point, if you're aware of the fact that Devon Sawa is Stan himself, the whole creator of the term Stan to refer to a fan that goes too far, plays the guy that's being stalked by a fan. It's like a whole fucking in-joke on the Eminem song in the video. That's the thing that wouldn't get past me, that I couldn't get past, I mean. So it's like the whole movie's just an in-joke with the casting of Devon Sawa. Forget whatever the fuck Travolta's doing here. I was distracted by that. But going into the actual movie... Now, and this is the other thing that I don't really like in regards to everybody trying to make every bad movie a fucking meme now, is that nobody's... Like, you put out one review and you're like, it's the most hilariously bad movie ever since The Room or whatever. Nobody's going to go into this and look at it from an unbiased standpoint. It's always going to be, oh my, like, every single note this movie plays, it's now programmed in people's minds to say, oh my god, that's the worst thing I've ever seen! It's so bad, it's hilarious. But it's like, the first half hour of this movie, I think there's something in there. And it's deep the fuck in there. But I don't want to ignore it either, because it is there. Like, you get this opening scene, and you have the shots of Hollywood and LA and all that, and you've got this music playing. And then you've got this stupid narration. There's this girl that's a paparazzi that hangs out with Travolta, and for some reason she's narrating the movie like throughout. And it's like if you take out this stupid narration, just these shots of L.A. and Hollywood with the music over it are pretty ominous. And like there's a certain atmosphere there. It's just hard to get around. Just like you want to fucking tune the narration out, it might be there. And then we're introduced to Travolta's character, and yeah, to talk about what Travolta's doing here. They do this whole thing also with transitions that are like animations, which I guess we're under the impression that Travolta's character draws to like show that like reenact shit in his life or something. I don't know. They didn't really go into that because his character clearly has something like some sort of mental illness, but with movies like this, you never even want to try to diagnose a character because you don't know what the fuck they're throwing in there in any sort of accuracy whatsoever. So it's just like this guy's clearly mentally ill in some way, and it's like maybe it's a mental illness the movie itself has conjured, because I'm sure it's like a whole bunch of characteristics of different things just in this one character sloppily. So he might seem like one thing in 1 minute and then another thing at the next, and you're never quite sure exactly what his deal is. So like when he comes in and he says his very first bizarre line, you just kind of get the sense that he's like, not only is he not all there, but he's like uncomfortably straightforward. And it's like, okay, maybe that's his thing. But then the different things that are wrong with him seem to jump around as the movie goes on. And it turns out that he has more and more problems with every situation he's put in. So, but some of this stuff, you've got to look. I really hate this whole thing where it's like, I always take it back to the 2006 Wicker Man with Nicolas Cage. Where it's like, I feel like there are a lot of movies where people can give bad movies the benefit of the doubt and point out the stuff that seems to be intentional on the makers of it. Like, people see what Travolta looks like in this movie, and they see his hair and his shirts and his weird getup and all that. And they're like, oh my god, this is going to be the worst movie ever. Oh my god, what were they thinking? And it's like, the fact that he looks fucking ridiculous is the point. Travolta has said in many interviews that's what they were. He looked for the most ridiculous hair he could find on Google, and he took it to Fred Durst, and he's like, that's what we're doing. That's the point, is that he looks fucking stupid. He looks unapproachable by all means. His name is fucking Moose, which I think was the original title of the movie before they went with the more generic straight-to-DVD title that they could probably sell better on those cheap-ass posters they put out. So there's that, and then at first it's like, you almost sympathize with him because he's just so pathetic. He's so fucking pathetic. But then as it goes on, it gets a little too far, a little too fast, and then we're like, okay, we get it now. This guy is the antagonist, not the misunderstood protagonist. So it's like, he gets a vest that Devon Sawa's character wore in a movie once that's like $800, and he pays like $300 for it, and he like fucking kisses it, and he like hangs it up. And so yeah, but we've seen this stuff before. It's the generic stalker character. That's all it is. And the idea is, it's like, you're never quite sure. Where the movie kind of slips up is, there's a line where you can't quite tell if they're going for campy or genuinely creepy. Every now and then, it seems to accomplish somewhat in a way what it's trying for. Because we do get stuff about his character that seems, intentionally funny. Like when he's trying to sneak into a party that Devon Sawa might be at, so he goes over a wall and he, like, crashes. And the first thing he says is, "Oh my god, is my shirt okay?" Because... See, there's no way that's not an intentionally funny line. And then the whole thing where he's trying to be this, he's like this struggling performance artist, and there's a whole pointless subplot where he's like battling this other street performer for, like, attention and money. And his whole thing is that he's like a constable that, like, goes into this really, like, over the top British stereotype with, like, his phrasing and his accent and all that. And yeah, you can tell Travolta's just fucking around. This isn't like some sort of, he thought he was doing some genuine performance, I believe, when he's doing the street performer stuff. I feel like that's them fucking around. But that's the thing also, is that the character is, like, supposed to be embarrassing. Like, you say, oh my god, he's so, cringy or whatever. Yeah, look at the fucking guy. That's the idea, is that he makes you fucking cringe when you see him do the shit that he does. I told you his name was Moose. If that's not enough in itself, when he hangs up the phone, he says Moosey out. I mean, how are people misinterpreting the whole thing? The whole idea Fred Durst and Travolta had with this character was, yeah, he's an embarrassing cringe fest. That's the fucking point. So, but yeah, as far as, like, him actually being, creepy about it, because Travolta's, like, all in on this. He's all the fuck in playing this part. So when he actually goes to Dylan Sala's house and he's outside the fucking gate, and the dude gets pissed off, he's, like, going to approach him because, like, he really wants him to sign that vest. But the way he approaches him is he turns sideways, so he's, like, not looking directly at him, and he's, like, inching closer to him while breathing really heavy. And it's like, yeah, that's for some reason that particular moment was actually really fucking creepy to me. Which is the point. He's a fucking stalker, and he completely loses his fucking shit if you call him that too. So it's like, which is the first sign of a stalker. So yeah, like, I feel like there is a little something in there where it's like, I see what this movie could have been, and probably what Durst was going for, and probably what Travolta was going for. It's just they can't seem to find the line between campy and genuinely creepy, and they miss the notes a lot more than they hit. They don't even necessarily hit a note. It's just like, you can see the note right there, and it's like, if they want to hit that note, they fall, like, right there sometimes. And it's like, that's the best we get. So, yeah, and then, like I said, there's the whole subplot, and I think the point of the subplot with the street performer that bullies him is, like, this way to try to make him sympathetic. But the thing about that is that the movie was never going to have the depth for that. Because there's this whole thing where they could have made him, like, a misunderstood character, and we could have really gotten into his psyche and be like, oh, that's totally off, but because we're in his mindset, it's like, we get why he would do that. But the movie doesn't have the depth to go into that. It seems like it's trying to make him sympathetic, but all we're doing as an audience is sitting back and going, oh god, dude, don't do that. But to the movie's credit, and I think this is to the movie's credit, there is some genuine suspense between the way they've built up how reckless Moose is and how he never thinks he's doing anything wrong when he's doing the crazy shit that he does. And you match that with the severe temper, the bad temper that Devon Sawa's character has. When Moose is, like, going around his house again and sneaking into the backyard and all that, there's genuine suspense that he's going to get caught because nobody wants to see that fucking scene if he is. Yeah, he probably deserves to get the shit beat out of him because he's acting fucking crazy. But there's just something about how you just don't want to see. And it's not sympathy for the character. It's just a fucking stressful situation to think about. And I think they do get there with that. And once again, just when it's like, okay, I see that, I get that, they do the misstep again, where it's like, they cut out kind of the campiness factor. It loses the campiness factor by the time he actually gets into the house and does the whole thing. And it's when you're like, okay, now the movie's trying to be 1 hour photo. And in the sense of doing that, is now gone into, we're going to play this straight. It's like, it's now in the territory to where we're being genuinely creepy, or we're hoping to be genuinely creepy. And it doesn't really reach that point. I feel like it was a lot creepier when it was like, we thought about the lengths he could go. But where he was just sort of standing out the gate. Once he goes through the gate and in the actor's house is where I think it kind of loses. It kind of loses our imaginations a little bit, and we kind of like, okay, we know where this is going now, and we know, like, in the timeline of the movie, like, now that he's in, like, there's this really prolonged scene where he hangs out in Devon Sawa's living room while he's actually sleeping in the chair, and Travolta's like taking selfies with him and kissing him while he sleeps and shit. And it's like at first you're like there's one moment that like genuinely made me say, oh shit. And it's when he like goes to take a selfie with him while he's sleeping, and he drops his phone on the dude's chest and like wakes him up for a second, and then he like falls back asleep. And you rationalize that, and you're like, oh, okay, he didn't freak out because Travolta ran away really quick, and he didn't freak out about the strange phone on his chest because he probably figured he was looking at his phone, he fell asleep, and he dropped his phone on himself and woke himself up. And when he realized that, just in his haze went back to sleep. That's believable. But then the scene keeps going and gets more and more unbelievable. Him, like, kissing him, putting a blanket over him, turning the TV on, sitting in the chair next to him, falling asleep next to him. And it's like, this motherfucker should have woken up a long time ago. Moose should be long fucking caught by now. And then that, it sort of loses the creepiness factor and the suspense factor, which was there for like a second, and then it just kind of did away with itself. So, yeah, and then it gets to some really ridiculous stuff where you get a sense that this one I was talking about just being really shoddily made, which is the real problem with these movies. And so you look at, like, there's one character, a side character, that's got to be... Because in these movies like this, you've got to have the side character that's the first to die, where you're like, oh, that's what this character's capable of, even if it's an accidental death. And it's still... And that's another one of those cases where you can't tell if they're trying to be funny or not anymore. Like, the line is kind of blurred now, and not in the good way. Where it's like, before we could defend them and say, that's intentional, you know, they're laughing with you, you're not laughing at them. But then it gets to that point where it's like, he punches her in the face, and she hits her head and dies. You know, the old... Everybody hits their fucking head and dies in movies like this. That's the way it goes. And so her nose is mangled and she's bleeding out. She's clearly dead because her eyes are not moving. And so he goes into like, oh, you got a nosebleed. That's real bad. That's real bad when you get nosebleeds. That's like, and it's like, I can't tell if that's supposed to be... if we're supposed to be laughing at him or scared of him now by this point, now that we know that he is capable of murder, but he doesn't he's so far gone, he does not realize he's committed murder. He thinks she's just laying down with a nosebleed and not responding for some reason. He gets so easily distracted that he just leaves her there. And this character is almost never addressed again. She's laying there, right there in the backyard, and, like, nobody ever finds her, apparently. Until the plot asks for it. Which is a very, very long time later. And another thing that kind of didn't really sit well here was that this character laying dead in the backyard should be holding a very key piece of evidence in her hand that negates the entire ending of this movie. And they I think they tried to play that off with rain, but the trouble is that there is a scene leading into this scene where they talk about it raining, the fact that it's raining. But apart from like a couple of leaves looking like they have water drops on them, and the sound effects, I didn't see rain. But people were talking about it raining, and I heard the rain, but I could not see this rain. So, whether it's a rain that can wash away evidence, I don't know. But they want us to believe it was there, so yep. It's going back to it. It's like, if you believe that it's there. Yeah, and then, like, yeah, that's basically what it is. Then it's Travolta doing the whole creepy thing. He, like, rocks in his chair and shit. But then we get to what's pretty much the ending of the movie, and it feels like there is a drastic jump, very suddenly. It's like, usually I really am into movies like this. They're kind of my guilty pleasure. These really sort of cheesy, you know, thrillers, these really trashy thrillers and stuff like that. But it's the progression of those thrillers that I always loved. And this one doesn't have that progression. It cheats us out of it. And it feels like there's a whole middle portion cut out of this movie. And it's like it gets bored with itself and just jumps to the climax. And then it's like, alright. And it's so disorienting, you're not even into it anymore. You're just trying to figure out how the hell you got here. And while you're still trying to piece it together, the movie's basically ending before your eyes. And gives us, like, the most shit-ass ending they could possibly come up with. I feel like that was the actual meeting, like in the writer's room. It was like, what is the worst fucking ending? The most avoidable ending we could possibly have. And it's like, and I feel like their main purpose here, apart from making a trashy thriller, was to do something like, say something about, fanaticism and social media. He's obsessed with putting stuff on his social media. That's what drives him to do the crazy shit that he does. But yeah, I don't know. And like I said, that line still is continuously blurred because there's like a couple of moments when we're really into the depths of the climax. You don't realize that at the time because of the jarring jump, but looking back, we're in the depths of the climax. And they're still occasionally throwing out like a funny moment here or there that doesn't really, I don't know. There's one moment where it was like when Devon Sawa was kind of trying to talk him down, and he's in like a really, a real situation of peril at the moment. And he's like, okay, man, let's calm down. Just tell me what your name is. And he's like, well, my name's Moose. And even in this dire moment, where he could be this close to death, he's bleeding from his shoulder as we speak. And when he hears that, his first inclination is to go, did you say moose? And then he tries to forget he heard that. And stuff like that is a little out of place by the time we're as deep in the movie as we are. But I can totally get them forgetting what tone they're going for when we're suddenly at the end, when I don't think anybody realized that. We just ended up here. So, yeah, so I don't know. And like I was talking about, the technical aspects are really the death of it. There's a point in time where the editor is on so much crack that we have a scene that's at night in Devon Sawa's house, and then there's a transition, and then it's morning in Devon Sawa's house. And it's like, he's on the phone, and he's in his bedroom, and he's talking on the phone, and then the next scene is him in the kitchen. There's barely a change in location with him and his son. Do you know what the transition between these two cuts is? Between the inside of Devon Sawa's house and then back in the inside of Devon Sawa's house? A whole giant pan of LA itself. I don't know who put that shot in there, but I don't think it's supposed to be there. I can see a fucking room reference coming from a mile away with those damn panning shots. I'm sure that's already been made, but yeah. So that's what we have here. I have no idea what's intentional, no idea what's not. I have an idea of what some of it was intentional, and I feel like the movie's going to get very blown out of proportion as the next horrible, terrible thing. But it's really just another shoddily made bad movie to me. Another failed stalker movie that tries to capture, some of the magic of like the more, I guess, 90s approaches to movies like this. But it's... yeah, and maybe there's a love of movies in there somewhere with all the different movie references, but it's in this, so there's not a whole lot of meaning to it. So there it is. All right. So I think I'm going to do versus, I guess, going into a couple of 90s action movies that I love, which, as I said before, are kind of gaining the reputation they deserve now because they were kind of ahead of their time and were seen as just regular action movies when they're kind of not. So I'd kind of like to address that in whatever way I can because they're movies I grew up with and love. So, yeah. And then from there, I think there's going to be other stuff coming out and other videos and shit. Another awards video at the end of the month. All that until the horror stuff in October. So, yeah, all that stuff. So until all of whatever that is, that's it.